Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to episode 40 of Talk4, the quickfire podcast where we ask four great questions to unique and interesting people behind the mic. Today is your host, Louis Skupien, that's me, and our special guest for today, Kegan Gill, who's going to be answering some questions today. Kegan, please say hi, introduce yourself, and give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do before I shoot some questions.
Yeah, hey, thanks again for having me on, Louis. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my name's Kegan Gill. My call sign in the Navy was Smurf. Uh, I'm a former Navy F-18E Super Hornet pilot. If you've seen the new Top Gun Maverick movie, that's the primary aircraft featured in that movie. So probably a lot more people these days know what a F-18 is than maybe they had in the past. But pleasure to be here.
No problem at all. And yeah, guys, look, I'm just going to say it now. Kegan is a absolutely incredible person. And I've done my research on him, I've done the backstory and stuff. And honestly, I couldn't imagine anyone more equipped to talk about toughness and resilience and fighting through things. And he is honestly such an amazing guy with such a great story to tell. And you know what? I can't wait to ask a few questions. And it is Kagan. Is it Kagan? Is it or Keegan? Or just confirm
Yeah,
that for me.
yeah, it's Kegan, like a keg of beer
Kagan.
is an easy way to
Okay.
remember. But
Got
I'll
it.
respond either.
Perfect. Okay. Well, if you're ready, should we jump on to question number one then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Right. So, for my first question, tell me about your backstory. How did you originally get into flying in the Navy, and what was your motivation to do so?
So when I was pretty young, my parents had a friend who had a little Cessna 152, and he took me up for a little flight in that thing. And I don't know, I was maybe like 10 or 12 years old, and I loved it. Like I was a little
Mhm.
scared at first climbing out in it, felt my stomach go kind of up, and I was like, oh no. And then as soon as I just relaxed, I was like, this is so cool. And it was a flight over northern Michigan in the summertime, and it's just like Caribbean blue waters, and it looked so beautiful below. And I was really into it as a young kid. And there's a small aviation college in where I grew up in northern Michigan called Northwestern Michigan College, and they offered a kids college program in the summer where you could come in. I think it was a 2 week long course or so. It was an introduction to aviation course, and in that course we did some ground school, and then kind of the highlight of it was we got to go fly. I think maybe even a couple times, just in a little Cessna with an introductory flight, and that kind of stuck with me as I went through high school and everything. There really wasn't anything else that grabbed my attention the way that aviation had, and so when I graduated high school, um, I decided, I mean, the college was right there. The same one I went to that is just a little community college, but they had a really nice flight program at NMC. And so I started going. And before I knew it, I'd gotten a bunch of ratings, my private, my instrument rating, my commercial. I became a CFI, CFII, got my multi and a bunch of other stuff in there too, and started gaining experience as a flight instructor, working for the very college I had started at. And while I was working on my bachelor's degree. I finished my bachelor's degree while I was a flight instructor, and then I got hired by a small business, uh, basically as a corporate pilot role. So I flew largely the business owner all over the country, and that was excellent experience. A lot of it was single pilot, making all my own decisions, kind of out there on my own a lot of the time. Got myself into some sketchy situations with icing, and one time I flew through an embedded thunderstorm, but
Oh God.
survived that experience. But I
Jeez.
really enjoyed it, and I got to see the business side of the world through that. A lot of corporate America, and I got a glimpse of that, and I really wasn't that interested. And it was a great job. I mean, the aircraft equipment was great. My boss was great, great human being, and I just kind of got a little bored with it. Uh, the stock market crashed in 2008, and things became pretty tight around the business, and there's talks of pay cuts and this and that. And I had a friend who was applying to go to the Navy to be a pilot. My friend Mark, who was also at NMC with me as a pilot, and I started talking to him about it. I was like, I mean, doesn't your dad have to be an admiral? And like, you go to the Naval Academy. And I didn't know I grew up, where I was at. We had the Blue Angels come every few years, and so I'd seen the Navy's demonstration team flying F-18s, and I always liked it. But as a kid, like I wasn't even allowed to have GI Joes or play Mortal Kombat, so uh, it was kind of funny when I started thinking like, wow, this seems like it would be a really cool adventure, and something I'm really interested in, to get the opportunity to potentially fly these high performance aircraft, whatever I might select. I really got interested, and so I found a website called airwarriors.com. If anybody's interested in getting into military aviation, it's a great resource for researching that. And I started researching a bunch, and I started to realize like I could do that. I could do that. Yep, that I meet that. I meet that. And so before I knew it, I put in an application. I got picked up. Um, and then I spent most of the several months prior. I went to a CrossFit gym. I got in really good shape, and I come fall, right before my OCS class started, I was like in tip top shape. I had pre-studied everything I could find, and I was just ready to rock.
Damn, there you go. It's so nice that you've always followed that passion for aviation and stuff. And if I might ask, what's your favorite thing about it? You know, being in the sky and stuff. Is there something that's really always been your favorite thing about it? Is there a highlight to it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember in school being stuck at a desk, filling out a worksheet and a Scantron, and doing all this stuff at a desk stuck inside under fluorescent lighting. And I was like, I do not want to have to be stuck in an office all the time. And I don't think I can. I've just always been a very active person, and I love the outdoors, and like just the freedom. And with flying, it was like, here's something I can do where I kind of get that freedom, it feels like, with all the flying and the views, and I'm not stuck in an office.
Mm,
Uh, and
there
so
you
I
go.
always, it always just kind of appealed, and I just kind of caught that itch for it. And I just really love that feeling where you're up in the sky and you're just kind of out of all the ordinary stuff, and you're just kind of free like a bird. Uh,
There you go.
maybe in a big part, it was that sensation that really attracted me to
That's
it.
so good. And so, all right, just tell me, for the fanboy in me. So, you started in a Cessna and you went to, you went to commercial flying. What was it like the first time that you flew an F-18? What did that feel like?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty surreal walking. Like when I showed up at the F-18 training rag, or FRS they call it now, at VFA 106 at NAS Oceana. I remember, showing up there after I'd selected F-18s. I was just beside myself, especially walking into the hangar and seeing these. They are so big, like when you're right up close to them. I couldn't believe it, because I remember thinking like, I remember moving from a Cessna 152 to a Cessna 172 and being like, wow, this thing is so cool. It's so much bigger, and it's got all this. So then walk in and be like, I can't believe I'm going to go fly this thing. Was pretty surreal just when I showed up. My first flight was, kind of kind of a shit show at first. I had a mission card malfunction, and so a lot of the data for the flight didn't download. But prior to that, I we were taxiing out on the runway and putting that thing into full afterburner. You've got two big engines on that thing, and each one in afterburner is producing 22,000 pounds of thrust. So you got 44,000 pounds of thrust
Jeez.
basically instantaneously blasting off behind you like a rocket, and you can really feel that on the runway, and it was just so cool.
Jeez.
Until we got airborne, and Squeezer is the call sign of my instructor for my first flight in the aircraft, who ended up being my squadron later at VFA 136. But he was in the back, and he's like, so missing anything? Kind of thing. And I was like, oh no, where are all the waypoints? So luckily, he knew what he was doing. He's like, hey, just, fly this heading, this altitude, and give me a second. So started punching in all the coordinates of all the waypoints we needed for the flight, which fortunately were just a few. The rest
Mm.
of the flight went pretty good, but it was a pretty cool experience overall, other than the mission card issue. But
There you go.
yeah, it was
No, that's great
surreal.
to hear. I can imagine. And so I asked this to my last guest, who was a fighter pilot as well, Mark Keller. How did you get the call sign then? Call sign Smurf. Is there a little story behind that or anything that happened?
Yeah, so yeah, I can get into that kind of along with the story of what all happened to me, which I think is one of your
Okay.
next questions.
Sounds
If you
good.
want me to save it for that, I can
Yeah,
work it in.
let's do it. Yeah, work it in. Right. So on that note, for question two, so for the people who don't know Kegan, during his time in the Navy, he had a horrific accident which forced him to eject at the speed of sound before his fighter hit the water. And that was obviously incredibly damaging to the mind and body, obviously. He's also the only person who has survived an experience of this caliber. So Kegan, would you be willing to talk us through what happened and tell me and the listeners, the story of this?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. So I was at VFA 143, the Puke Dogs, after I finished the F18 training rag as they call their FRS.
Hmm.
So I was a I was a fairly new guy in the squadron still. I'd been in the squadron about 8 months. And I had largely played the small mouth, big ears role, which is a pretty good place to be as a new guy in a fighter squadron. A lot of listening and very little talking. And so that morning, it was January 15th, 2014. I was going on this flight to go do some basic fighter maneuvering or dog fighting. And one of the more senior JOs in the squadron came up. His call sign was Basil. Uh, and he said, you just haven't done anything that stupid to earn a call sign yet. And there were guys that had joined the squadron after me at this point, and they had already had a bunch of call sign possibilities. The other guys that had joined with me already had call signs. My buddy Dr. Ape and Fisty, and so I was overdue for one. And just so happened that Basil said that morning. I think he jinxed me for doing something crazy. Uh, Also, my buddy Tommy's at the SDO desk, so working the radios and the phone for the day. And behind him, he had put up on the whiteboard behind him all the positions of big tagged sharks that there's this app called Shark Tracker you can get on your phone. And he had done this as just for humor because Fisty is just hilarious dude, and he's always doing funny stuff to cheer everybody up, which is really invaluable when you're in a high stress environment of fighter aviation all the time. You need something to laugh at to survive a lot of the time. But he'd put this up and he's like, hey man, today would be a terrible day to eject. There's a 16-foot great white shark right underneath your working area you're going to be flying. Her name's Mary Lee. She's 16 feet long and weighs about 3,500 pounds. And so we joked about that. Anyways, got ready for the flight. Brief all went good. Got dressed and walked out to the aircraft. Swapped out an aircraft with what's called a hot switch. So another squadron mate, Sugar, was pulling into the line in the Super Hornet. He climbed down the ladder. Quick handshake and an update on any situation with the aircraft. The aircraft was all good to go. I climbed up the ladder and away we went. I was flying with my skipper that day, so my commanding officer, senior pilot in the squadron. And we went out and we did a few plugs of aerial refueling to check a pod that had just come out of maintenance. So it was basically this big, it's called an ARS, aerial refueling pod that goes onto the bottom of another
Mm.
Super Hornet. So we can do air-to-air refueling within a squadron
Oh, yeah, I've
or an
seen
air
that.
wing.
Mm.
So buddy, Marshall, Hipster is his call sign, was flying that aircraft. He flew up, put out a little drone that comes out behind it, a basket. And then the skipper and I, him and his jet, and me and mine, we put our little fuel probe out on our nose. And then I got into position and took a few plugs of fuel off of the tanker. That was all going smooth. Got a few tries at it, a few practice plugs, disengaging, re-engaging, and all was good to go. Skipper kind of did the same thing. The pod was working great. We got some proficiency in that as it's a perishable skill like many things in aviation. And with extra fuel and some extra time, we went off to set out on what was one of my favorite things to do in a Super Hornet. Kind of the thing that you probably think of when you think fighter pilot is aircraft trying to shoot down other aircraft in close quarters within a few miles of each other. And it's incredibly challenging, but incredibly fun. And I had just gotten my qualification with the JHEMIX helmet, which is a joint helmet mounted cueing system. And so with that, I was able to turn my head, and all of my weapon systems and flight information would track with in a visor. So I could see basically over my shoulder, potentially engage another aircraft. So a really cool system, but just like any new piece of gear, it takes a little bit of practice to get used to, especially something that complex. And so I was still a little, distracted learning that new system that day. We did several sets, kind of went as expected. The skipper was kicking my ass. It's kind of like stepping in the ring with Mike Tyson. And a lot of times in fighter aviation, I'm out there fighting a dude who's been doing this for 15, 20 years. And he was a Top Gun graduate and extremely proficient. And, he kicked my butt, but through that, I was learning. Like, just when you get beat up in a fight, you start to learn stuff. And little by little, it was clicking. Nothing really that remarkable happened. Through all those fights, we would set up, we would fight. We'd call the knock it off once someone was clearly winning, which was the skipper that day every single time. And we set up for our last one. We had hit Joker fuel, which is the fuel state just before we get to what's called bingo fuel, which is where you have to basically head straight home at bingo. But we hit Joker fuel. We had just enough fuel and time to get one more set in, or at least a part of a set. So we set up down at about 12,500 feet. We were going 450 knots, and we were about a mile abeam each other. And the skipper called 3, 2, 1, fights on. We pitched in at each other, and we kind of came to a merge at nose low, and we were really going fast because we started pretty quickly. And, we started this fight at over 2 nautical miles up in the sky. So 12,500 feet. The ground wasn't a huge concern in my mind when we started the fight. And so when I met that merge, I decided to roll the aircraft inverted and continue my pull. Coming to the merge, I was kind of distracted trying to get my JHEMIX to work and using the radar. And I was out of my normal habit pattern of scanning my airspeed and my altitude. And so rather than looking at the airspeed and altitude, I was kind of distracted, and I didn't realize how fast I had gotten. Rolled the jet inverted and continued that pull in the dive I was already started. And I started a dive straight down at the ocean. And when I got to about bullseye nose low, so pointed straight down at the water, the aircraft hit an airspeed that hit was called the G bucket. So the aircraft thought it had bombs on the wings that were actually not there. And it started to reduce the G that I could pull with the aircraft. So this was like going around a sharp corner in a sports car and then having the steering wheel kick back halfway. So I went from a nice crisp 7.5 G pull. I can feel that force on my head and my neck. My body weighs almost 8 times what it normally does. And with my head and my helmet combined weighing about 20 pounds or so, essentially I had like almost 160 pounds of force up on top of my neck. So I could feel that as I hit bullseye nose low, though, that all eased up. And that was the first cue that I got that something was awry. I remember that feeling, like everything just lifted, the jet stopped turning, and now I was just stuck in this dive. The aircraft was still turning slightly, but it was half the turning rate that it was doing prior to that, if not less. And so as I came through, this all just happens in a few seconds, by the way. I didn't have a whole lot of time to think this through. And next thing I knew, the ocean is just rushing up at me. And so all I knew was the jet's not doing what I was telling it to do. The stick is not responding how I wanted it to. I'm getting the hell out of here before I impact the ocean. And that was the only option at that point for me. I had already put the speed brake out. I had pulled the throttles to idle, but it just wasn't enough. And so the jet just shooting straight down to the ocean. I was going about 51 degrees nose low, so about that steep or so. And when I pulled the ejection handle, I was at just over 2,000 feet above the ocean. I was going 604 knots indicated airspeed, which is 0.95 indicated Mach number. So 95% the speed of sound. So right at the transonic sound barrier, essentially. That's about it's 695 miles per hour if you're going to do it in miles per hour. So I was going really fast. And A normal ejection is pretty violent. I mean, people's spines get compressed just from that rocket booster going off under you. You know, and the instantaneous G of that rocket going off with the ejection seat is about 50 Gs instantaneously. And then you do a sustained G of about 14 Gs. So extremely high G forces that'll compress your spine in a normal ejection, with this being way outside the envelope for what you're supposed to eject, although injection is an emergency thing, so I didn't have another option other than die. But what really messed me up was the speed of that. As I came out of the aircraft, I hit that airflow that's going 700 miles per hour essentially. And, you know, I think hurricanes start at like 70 miles per hour or so, or at least like a tropical storm's about 70 miles per hour. So, you know, it's 10 times the wind speed that you would if you were to step out into a tropical storm or hurricane, like a Cat 1 hurricane. And, you know, if you've ever stuck your arm out a car window going down the highway at 70 miles per hour, you know how that pulls your arm back pretty strong. That parasitic drag acting on you at 700 miles per hour, that force of parasitic drag is exponentially stronger. So something like 100 times the force that you would feel at 70 miles per hour impacted me all at once, along with that force of the ejection. And it just tore me apart. I mean, smashed my head. I broke my neck. I broke my left shoulder. Both my upper arms were just flailing like ragdoll. I broke both my upper arms. My right radius, this arm bone ripped through my brachial artery in my arm. This left forearm just shattered into pieces. I don't know if it smashed my face or hit the aircraft on the way out. Both my legs were just flailing around violently. I was wearing steel-toed boots, and essentially as my legs flailed around, the thought is that those became like maces, just smashing my tib fibs. So I had big open fractures on my legs. Chunks of my tibia were falling out of my leg, essentially chumming the water for Mary Lee. And so I was just, you know, this is all just in a second, you know, less than a second of impacting the air like that, just ragdolled me. It shredded my dry suit open. I was wearing a dry suit because we're flying over the Atlantic Ocean in January, and the buoy temperature was, I think it was 37 degrees Fahrenheit that day. So really cold water temperatures with freezing air temperatures. And so wearing a dry suit, but because of the speed, that thing shredded open. A lot of the gear on my survival vest ripped off. And not that I could have used it anyways, as my arms were just completely destroyed, a variety of nerve damage and all the brakes and everything. And luckily my parachute opened enough to slow me enough before I impacted the water that I didn't die in the impact with the ocean. And then that parachute that had just saved me sunk underneath the ocean and started to pull me under. We have a system that's supposed to automatically disconnect that. When it hit salt water, unfortunately, that system didn't operate properly. And so I was stuck to my parachute with no ability to reach up and manually disconnect it. And so the things that were supposed to be saving my life at this point, the parachute did, but then it sunk underneath the ocean currents and started yanking me under and drowning me alive. My dry suit filled up with that cold ocean water. And if you've ever felt water at that temperature, you know, it feels like needles on your skin. And when your head goes under, it's like brain freeze. And so just extremely cold, destroyed, getting drowned. You know, if you've ever been held under by a big wave surfing, or you want a breath of air and you can't get it, that's where I was at. And I spent about an hour and a half just getting drowned alive and bleeding out, and thinking that Mary Lee was going to come up at any minute and just finish me off, you know. Luckily, my skipper saw my ejection. He became the on-scene commander, and he coordinated with a fishing vessel that was nearby, got them back to my position before he ran out of fuel, because he was on fumes, essentially. He had to hand off the on-scene commander some other aircraft in the area. But they were at least able to get a mark on my position, so people knew my approximate location with that. And once the fishing vessel got over, that gave a visual position of my rough location to all the other aircraft involved in the rescue. My beacon didn't function, so fortunately it was daytime, and fortunately that fishing vessel got over there due to the efforts of my skipper. It's quick thinking. And anyways, you know, I'm bobbing around, getting pulled under. There's several helicopters dispatched, one from Coast Guard helicopter. I think there was a Coast Guard ship that showed up. And then there were two Navy H-60 Seahawk helicopters that showed up. And the first one showed up, and I think there was some sort of miscommunication. They jumped into the ocean. They thought I was on the boat that was there, the fishing boat, which I wasn't, unfortunately, at that point. And luckily, the other helicopter had showed up, saw that, and they're like, I don't think that's him. And the pilot saw my little head bobbing. So they flew over. The rescue swimmer Cheech jumped out, got in the ocean with me. He said he got in and he could see underneath the water, and he hooked into my, we have like a titanium D-ring on our harness. And he said he hooked into me to keep hold of where I was at. And he said once he was hooked in, that the force of the parachute, even with him being, the strong, fit rescue swimmer, he said it was just impossible to fight it. It just pulled both of us under. He said he remembered looking down and just seeing this blue abyss down below us. But he, his training kicked in. He got his knife out. He cut all the paracord loose, got me hooked into the helicopter and pulled up. I was in and out of consciousness through a lot of this, and I retrograde amnesia from a lot of it. But he said that, the rope was spinning and we're swaying around. There's all this prop wash, and they get me up into the helicopter. And he said the ride to the hospital was about 45 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours because the whole way there, I'm, in and out of consciousness, coding, so near death. But they got me back to Norfolk Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center, fortunately. So as equipped as anybody could be to take care of a serious trauma like I was. And they had the freaking dream team of these surgeons on that day. And, little by little, they started to put me back together again. First, they treated me for severe hypothermia. By the time I got to the hospital, my core body temperature was about 87 degrees Fahrenheit, which I've heard now that at 86, you're dead. So I was within about a degree of dying from hypothermia, but the hypothermia actually kept me from bleeding to death from all my, my brachial arteries ripped open. So that thing's bleeding like crazy. Both my open leg fractures are bleeding. And they said, had my dry suit functioned, I would have bled to death in my dry suit, all warm and toasty. But they induced me into a coma. I had to, get a lot of blood transfusions. My kidneys were failing from rhabdomyosis, which, just the overwhelming trauma to my body was just shutting down my organs essentially. But they were able to stabilize me. They got me into surgery, and I spent the next week undergoing over a dozen trauma surgeries where they rebuilt my skeleton with titanium rods and screws and plates. And they did an artery bypass on my brachial artery, fasciotomies on all 4 extremities. So a lot of limb salvage procedures. I was very fortunate that they were able to do everything they did. After a week of all that, they were trying to get me out of the induced coma, but I just wasn't coming to. Combination of the drugs, the head injury, the trauma, I just wasn't waking up. And so a lot of my squadron mates are there at the hospital along with my family at that point. My mom and dad had showed up, and they're all in the waiting room, just kind of like waiting to hear if I'm going to pull through. And my friends, I was a kiteboard instructor for a little bit while I was in college, and my friends at Bronia Kiteboarding, which is now M22, they gave me the nickname Scrappy. And my friend Matt, who's a co-owner with his brother Kegan of that company that I was a kiteboard instructor for, he always called me Scrappy, and he was kind of like they were both like a big brothers to me. But in the Navy, if something really bad happens, you're supposed to put somebody that you trust to deal with the emergency situation. And I thought Matt would be the perfect guy for that. And so I had put him as a contact if there was ever something terrible that happened to me on that letter, and gave that to my skipper, not thinking that they would ever need to open this letter. But when this happened, the skipper opened that letter and it had Matt's contact information. So he called Matt, and I guess the first thing Matt says, "Are you talking about Scrappy?" And so my skipper thought Scrappy was really funny. He told that to everybody in the squadron when he got back to kind of cheer everybody up. And then they were kind of wondering if I was going to pull through. And Basil, I think is the guy in my squadron who said, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be all right. And so scrappy motherfucker stuck. They condensed that down to Smurf as a makeshift acronym. And then because it's the Navy, you have to have a politically correct cover story for your call sign if it involves anything inappropriate, like the word fuck. Uh, so they said I'm a short guy who turned blue in the ocean from hypothermia is the official reason why I'm Smurf, but it's really because I'm a scrappy motherfucker. uh, so, anyways, another week went by. I eventually came out of that comatose state, and I really had no idea where I was at or what had happened. I had no memory of it at that point. I was on just a massive amount of drugs. I mean, they had me on fentanyl and Dilaudid and oxycodone and OxyContin and it's like they just kept putting me on more and more stuff for pain management. But little by little, I like started to come to and realize where I was at. I remember my squadron mates were in there going, hey, we're just happy to see you're alive. I'm like, I got to get back to work, like get a wheelchair and get me out of here. Like I didn't realize how damaged I was. I was from the head injury, I think, and the drugs. I was really out of it. And it took a few months for me to start to regain much mental function. But they drove me in an ambulance down to Richmond, Virginia eventually. And I spent 3 months rehabilitating in a trauma center there, relearning how to use my arms. I speech therapy, vision therapy, kinesiotherapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, you name it, all day, every day was basically just working to get better. And I really wanted to get better. I had medical staff come in and say, you're never going to walk again. You're never going to use your arms again. Your flying career is over for sure. But every time they would say that stuff, there was this little thing inside of me that was like, fuck that. I'm going to prove all these people wrong. And so that was my motivation every day, was just like try to wiggle a little bit. And when I came to, I was paralyzed. Like I couldn't move anything, but little by little, I was starting to able to scooch to the bottom of the bed. Another big motivator. I mean, I was shitting on myself, and I had to have these corpsmen come and clean me off, which was pretty unpleasant. So I just wanted to get my function back. And little by little, though, keeping at it with all the therapy, family support. I was getting food from the outside world, luckily, because the VA food was just garbage, in short, unfortunately. It was kind of funny. Well, not funny, but I thought it was odd that, they spend all this money on this big facility and all this equipment and all these therapists and everything. And then the most important part is probably getting some sleep and getting good food. And they wake you up all night to take your vitals, and then they feed you garbage food. So it's like, all right, there's something that could use a little improvement for sure. But overall, I was very fortunate to be there. They have an excellent staff. They got me back together to the point where I could get around on a walker. And then I spent the next 2 years rehabilitating through outpatient therapy and largely on my own. And one of my friends in the squadron, Smugla, his wife happened to be a physical therapist, affectionately known as Aunt Smugs or Amanda. She started working with me outside of, her clinical setting. And, the first day she showed up with this Nalgene bottle, and on the side of it, it said patient's tears. And so, I knew she was about to kick my ass, which was perfect because I was all about that kind of workout prior to this accident. And so I was using that same, intensity in my workouts, even though I could barely do anything that I could do before. But little by little, she beat my ass into shape. My buddies put me under their wing and were taking me out surfing as soon as they could. My buddies Spicoli and Neil and Vinny and Rich and all these guys were getting me out mountain biking and like doing all this stuff again. And a lot of it I could hardly do. Like I could barely use the brake on the mountain bike. I could barely paddle in the surf, and I got beat up a bunch by waves. But little by little, that stuff started to get me better. I was on a massive amount of drugs. So despite the pain management clinic basically telling me you just need to stay on that stuff, I just started to taper myself off. At that point I was on, gabapentin, which is a pretty heavy duty nerve medication was really addictive for me. And oxycodone, OxyContin, amitriptyline, tramadol, trazodone. I mean, the list goes on of all the shit that they were pumping me up with. And getting off of that stuff was miserable. I mean, going through the withdrawals, but I did it. And 2 years later, I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness standards, and I went back to flying Super Hornets. And that's kind of where like the Disney happy ending version would end, I think. Uh, Unfortunately, you know, after about a year and a half of being back flying, I started to experience more intense symptoms from a TBI. Uh, I came back from a flight, and I thought maybe it was what was happening was decompression sickness, which can happen in the Super Hornet if the pressurization system malfunctions. So first thought maybe that was it. They put me into a pressurization chamber, a hyperbaric chamber at a dive center nearby where we were that day, and that helped a little bit. But when I got back from that detachment to the place where I was stationed at that point, which was NAS Lemoore in California with VFA 136 Nighthawks, I went into medical, which was the last thing I wanted to have to do because I already had this stack of medical waivers that I fought for to get back, and all this help to get me back. And so to go in and be like, something is wrong and I might not be able to fly again was extremely difficult, but I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to get somebody injured or killed or kill myself by making a mistake or crashing another aircraft. So I went in, and the advice I got there was I had to go see the psych department because, they focused on this cognitive impairments that I was having, which were largely, I couldn't sleep. My memory was gone. I was having a really hard time focusing. And anyways, they started to see me at the psych department, and the answer was largely more pharmaceutical medications. And they put me on a drug eventually called quetiapine to help me sleep. It's an antipsychotic medication, also called Seroquel. And they put me on that, and it was to help me sleep initially. And it didn't take very long. I started to have all the little, I had like a little bit of paranoia and a little bit of hypervigilance along with the mental dysfunction, which retrospectively was largely TBI related, but they focused on a PTSD diagnosis, and the focus was this medication, and it just started to exacerbate things. And next thing I knew, I was going into these psychoses. I couldn't distinguish between my reality and what was just made up in my head. I went to the commissary with my wife, and everybody in there had these ghoulish faces and big black eyes, and everybody was staring at me, and there were these monsters that were like trying to suck my soul out of me essentially. And as we left base, my wife was driving, and I looked back, and it looked like the entire base had just ripped out of the ground, and there's all this rebar and dirt and boulders falling, and there was this black pit. It was like this gateway to hell had opened underneath the base. And of course, I'm just hallucinating all this stuff.
Oh,
Sometimes the hallucinations were really exciting. Like I thought my wife was a secret agent who'd come to save me. I thought she was Carrie Matheson from Homeland. And it changed minute by minute, day to day. Sometimes I was kind of back to normal. Other times I thought I was in the Truman Show where everybody was, watching me and listening to me and tailoring everything to me. And anyways, this was not conducive to flying. And unfortunately, things just continued to degrade. Eventually, I was medically retired, and I moved back to Northern Michigan with my family. And they just kept upping the dose of quetiapine as the only option really for me to get better. Um, and I had my dose increase from 300 milligrams per night up to 450 milligrams of this quetiapine. And that was when I went into the most violent psychosis I had yet. Anyways, I ended up in the middle hospital. I ended up down in the Battle Creek VA inpatient psych facility. I had a pretty miserable experience there, being kind of drugged against my will, poor sleep, poor food, not the place to rehabilitate. Luckily, I had a lot of family support that got me out of there eventually. And when I got back, I was just broken. I was this depressed shell of a human who I once been. I couldn't focus. And luckily, I stumbled upon psychedelic therapy. And I found an organization called Vet Solutions. I know you spoke with Marcus Capone,
Yes,
uh,
yeah.
and I sent them an email. I knew I didn't really qualify for their program. I wasn't special forces. I didn't have 2 combat tours, but I was like, this seems like a reasonable direction to go. I had stumbled through the book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and that really stuck with me. And I mean, stumbled because I could only read about a paragraph at a time before I had to take a break from it because my cognitive abilities were so poor at that point. But stumbled through it, found Vet Solutions just through searching the internet, and I really wanted to try psychedelic therapy because I thought that maybe helped because I had tried so much other stuff that wasn't helping, largely based on medication. And they sent me an email back, kind of like, hey, I understand from listening to Marcus and talking to Marcus at this point, I've heard how he, it's like Schindler's List for him and Amber, where they have all these people that need the therapy, but they can only give it to so many. And so I didn't get to go to his program, but he put me in contact with Warrior Angels Foundation, which is run by a former Green Beret, Andrew Marr, and his brother Adam, who's a former attack helicopter pilot. Great dudes. They were putting together an event based off of David Goggins' 4x4x48 challenge, which was run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight. And they had a fundraiser page going. I put a little bit about my story up on there. And before I knew it, there was a bunch of attention and people were donating a lot to my page. And so, Adam called me up and he's like, hey, do you want to come down to Texas and do the event? And I was like, absolutely. And when I got down there, I was still in pretty rough shape mentally. I had just kind of weaned myself off of uh, the psych medication against the advice of my psychiatrist, and my family was all very concerned. But when I got down there, I met this whole community of military members, largely special forces types, Green Berets, Marine radars, SEALs, all these guys. And they had very similar stories and experiences to me as far as dealing with a brain injury and trauma and then being overprescribed these medications and having it make them way worse. And they all had very similar stories. And so I realized that I was on the right path and I was invited into this community of people who saw through the bullshit of the pharmaceutical industry and that was not the answer. And so, had a great event, ran 48 miles with all these guys, made a bunch of really good friends and close contacts there, and started a different path to healing, which is largely based on getting off the pharmaceutical crap. That stuff might be useful in the very short term, but long term, it is so damaging. Went to a very holistic focus with supplementation with nutraceuticals. I had already focused on improving my diet, exercise, and little by little, those things came together. And then I was invited by Jesse Gould, who runs Heroic Hearts, down to Peru. And I did an ayahuasca retreat there, which is a very potent psychedelic. And that, in short, I felt helped to heal my soul and gave me this reset that I needed to start a new direction in my life in so many ways emotionally. And it opened me back up. I had been just cut off from my emotions from so long, from it just being miserable and being in pain and all the emotional stuff that I had going on. I had just shut that down, and ayahuasca helped to open that door back up so I could feel positive emotions. Because unfortunately, when you shut down all the bad stuff, all the good stuff goes away too a lot of the time. So, I wasn't feeling compassion for my kids and my wife and like everybody. I was just this alone, broken soul, and the ayahuasca helped to change that. Uh, Defenders of Freedom, run by Donna Cranston, invited me down to Resiliency Brain Clinic. There I did a 2-week TBI clinic, thanks to Kelsey Sharon, who got me in touch with them. And she, Doc G and Michelle and Jay and all those guys down there put me through 2 weeks of this training. And it was largely just eye movements and these very simple procedures that they could have this on every military base. And after I got out of that, they did testing at the beginning, at the end. I had massive cognitive functioning improvements, in 2 weeks. And looking back at it, I think like if I had gotten that kind of treatment when I started displaying the symptoms that my TBI were giving me back while I was still flying, I think I'd likely still be flying for the military. But anyways, it's been a huge turnaround, and I'm kind of getting my life back, rekindling my romance. I know that was a long answer, but there's a lot of stuff that happened. But uh, yeah, I'm just kind of on a new path to healing, and it's been tremendously beneficial for me and the people that I've seen utilizing these techniques.
Man, I mean, that actually is the most incredible story I've ever heard. And reading up about it, reading the facts, listening to the stuff that people have said, it doesn't do it justice to what you've just said. It's absolutely incredible, and I can't even imagine how tough mentally you'd have to be to get through that sort of a thing. And your family too. They must have really gone through that with you as well. And I think you guys have done a
Oh yeah.
fantastic job to get back to where you were. And I mean, everything that could have gone wrong just went wrong there. It's incredible. And I know you said about jinxing it, but it seems like that's almost what happened. But I'm just so glad that you're where you are now, and looking at your Instagram and stuff you're doing, all the biking and the running. It's so inspiring. And you know what? My third question was going to be about your recovery and stuff, but I feel like you've kind of answered
Sorry,
that. So
I kind of
honestly,
jumped ahead there.
I'm going to change that question. What I want to know really is, what did it take for you to dig in mentally when you were bobbing around freezing cold, probably in the most painful, excruciating way? What did it take to get through that? Because I mean, an hour and a half is a long time. And I know people say time flies when you're having fun, and the opposite is very true. So
Sure.
honestly, how did you manage to do that? How did you get through it and stay conscious and stuff and keep above water?
I was in and out of consciousness a lot of it, and I inhaled a lot of salt water,
Mm.
and there was just some will to live still in me somehow, and I was fortunate enough to somehow get to the surface on occasion, cough out a bunch of water, get a breath before I got pulled under again, and just it was just full up survival mode at that point. Um, to get through that was just, I guess, just survival mode. But the real sort of mental fortitude, I think, was developed kind of after I woke up in the hospital and was like, shit, I'm completely destroyed. My body is paralyzed. I just crashed an $89 million fighter jet. Um, you know, it would have been so easy at that point to just say, my life is over. I fucked up, and fuck it, I don't care anymore. And I could have just buried myself in prescription drugs. I could have stopped caring, and that happens to people in that situation for sure. But I just had this fight in me still that was like, you know what? I think I can I think I can do this. I know I can't do that right now, but maybe I can do this. Maybe I can wiggle my foot. Maybe I can sit up in the bed if I keep at it. And it was just I became very focused on the day to day, just what can I do today? What
That,
can I do? And I think by breaking this massive goal of recovering into little bites that I just stuck at every day with discipline and focus, that's what rebuilt me, was just keeping at it and keeping that hope alive. And don't get me wrong, I had periods where I lost hope, especially while I was going through that medical board, and it looked like my flying was future was over. My career that I had worked so hard for was disappearing, and being in and out of these psychoses and depressed. I almost took my Glock out of my end table and put it in my mouth, and I was even contemplating what's the gun oil going to taste like in my mouth, and what's the barrel going to feel like in my teeth. And the only thing that kept me out of that was my little newborn son was laying next to me in bed with my wife, and I couldn't do that to them, and I didn't want to wake them up with the gunshot. And I started to think, like, what would happen if I did that? They would wake up and have dad all over the wall. Like, that would be the worst thing I could do to my family. And so a lot of it was my family got me through it. And somehow my wife stuck with me through all of this, and she's a freaking hero for doing so. I mean, I had just become a different miserable human being for a long time. My personality had changed. Um, and so I was just very fortunate all around to be here. The amount of support and things that I've been fortunate to stumble upon, the help I've gotten, and especially in this last year through all these nonprofit organizations, I've just been so fortunate. But it's just been that just sticking through it. And even if all that means is just not pulling a trigger, maybe that's all you can do that day. I'm just not going to pull that trigger. you know what can you do? And stick with it, and have some hope, and know that there's hope out there. There's other options. You don't have to be stuck in that dark place of medications and miserable the rest of your life. But yeah, that's kind of what got me through.
That is so powerful. And you know, I'm just looking at you right now on the screen, and all I can think is that it's just an absolute miracle that I have the opportunity right now to talk to you and that you got through all of that. It's so, so powerful. And I think as well that for anyone listening to this who's having a hard time in life, or it's just being going through stuff, or people get suicidal, and I think it's so important to take Kegan's words really to heart there. You have to think about what it's going to do to people around you as well. And sometimes, it's easy to get selfish and feel like no one cares or the world's a bad place and stuff. But if you just look around you at the family, that might just be enough to stop you from making a bad decision, that things can get better as well straight after it. And Kegan, actually on this topic for my fourth question, it's on topic. For anyone listening who is going through a really hard time, whether that's mental health, illness, or anything that is just making them question where things are heading, what would be your best advice or encouragement that things can get better, and how should they face the problem and get back on top? I feel like there's no one in this world more equipped to answer this question than you, to be honest.
Well, thanks. And that's a huge compliment knowing some of the guests you've had on. But I appreciate it. And some things I would say is life can be hard on people. I mean, we all go through our struggles and our traumas, and maybe not everybody's is as extreme as a high speed ejection, or being a special operator and getting blown up, and all of that. But life is hard on us as people, especially today with the society that's so hustle and bustle and go, go, go. I mean, chronic stress has a lot of the same effects on people's brains as a TBI. It causes these little micro tears, and it causes damage to the brain. And especially in a society that is just full of junk food and fast living, and alcohol and all the things that we do to ourselves, just being alive, whether you're a soccer mom hustling your kids all over the place, and scrambling to make dinner and having these sleepless nights, whatever your situation, people go through those and they end up depressed, and they end up worn down, and they don't want to quit, and know that a big part of that is your brain is getting damaged through all of that. And I mean, damage happens to all of us, in one way or another, but there is a way to heal that. And it doesn't have to involve psych medications. Maybe there's a place for that I was listening to Slider talk with you, great dude. And he was talking about how, that's something that can maybe get you off the couch and get you working out in the short term, some of these psych medications. But I would say very short term. And if you can avoid that and just have the will to get off the couch and do it yourself, you're going to be way ahead of where you would be if you have to go down the path of those medications. But just have hope and know that you can heal your brain. And as your brain starts to heal through, getting better sleep if you can. Some things that can help are eating better, getting the processed junk out of your diet, which is extremely hard, especially, I don't know how it is in the UK, but freaking in the States, man, our food is garbage. Our whole food system is being subsidized by the government with hundreds of billions of dollars a year to produce cheap processed garbage food. That all started out with good things back in the 70s or whenever, but where it's evolved to now, unfortunately, we are just bombarded with crap. Even the stuff that's supposed to be health foods is full of shit. And so just getting yourself off of the garbage can be hugely helpful. Get yourself on you know, some fruits and vegetables and some high quality meats. Get away from all this industrial processed crap. That is a huge thing. Stop drinking sugary crap. Try to stop drinking so much alcohol or less alcohol or no alcohol. Caffeine affects your sleep. All these things fuck with you. And if you can start to remove those, even just a little bit, over time, it's going to help you get better. Drink clean water. Again, unfortunately, a lot of places the water is chlorinated, and that stuff just destroys your gut microbiome, which you need those gut bacteria for your brain function to be good. And so when you can start to eliminate a lot of the garbage that we take in every day, we can start to heal. But it just starts with having hope and just starting to try to find some answers. What can you do? As a veteran, we're fortunate right now. There seem to be more and more of these nonprofit organizations popping up that are taking people in and giving us a different path than the pharmaceutical regimen at the VAs. But there's a lot of other people out there that aren't veterans that aren't going to have access to that. But things you can do all by yourself. Start eating better. Start drinking clean water. Start getting some exercise. You don't have to go and start doing powerlifting or CrossFit. Just go outside for a walk for 5 minutes. Start somewhere and stick to it and try to get better and just have that hope that you can get better and you can heal the damage that's been done. Severe injury, nerves can regrow, your brain can regrow. If you can get nutraceuticals and fish oils and these things, they can help expedite that. Yeah, I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but the first thing is just that will to live. In college, I was really lucky. I had a Navy test pilot, a pretty legendary dude. Mike Stock was one of my instructors, and he'd spent a career in the Navy. He was a Huey gunship pilot. He flew in Vietnam. He was part of the Sea Wolves, which was one of the first special operations helicopter unit that would fly guys day and night into any kind of crazy shit and come pick them back up again, no matter what kind of thing. And anyways, this guy with this legendary career and all this experience, and he taught a class on survival that I took while I was in college. And the thing he said you have to survive above all else was the will to live. And if you can just have the will to live, you can start to improve and you can get better and you can heal and you can survive. But without that will to live, which it's easy to lose, especially when you're really beat down, But I hope if you're listening to this, I hope this maybe gives you that little spark that you can get better. You can heal. You can get out of your situation you're in. I don't know what that is and how you're going to do it, but just have that will to live and work at it. Do what you can do right now.
Kegan, that is probably the best answer I've ever had to a question on this podcast. And that is just absolutely sound, perfect, factually driven advice. And I really hope so many people get to hear this message as well. It's very powerful. And I've got nothing to add to that at all. All I want to know now really is what's next for you, man? What you've got this life now, you've recovered, you've gone through all this stuff. What's on the agenda for you? Do you have any big goals? And honestly, your story, the stuff you've been saying, that in my opinion is best-selling book material. Do you have any plans for something like that too?
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, yeah, I mean, just this past year, I went from a point uh, where I didn't, I didn't think I was ever going to have a life again. I thought I was just doomed. And
Mm,
just in this past year, it's completely turned around. And I'm not saying everything's perfect. It's not this linear path to healing. It has its ups and downs, and I'm still working on a lot of things, but um, yeah, some of the things I'm working on right now, I am writing a book about what's happened. I've been taking every opportunity I have to speak about this with folks like yourself and get this message out, because I know for me, I didn't hear this, what I'm saying right now, and I lost that. I was starting to lose that hope, and I had lost it. But once I heard there were other people like me, that was what gave me that spark to continue on that path. And so I hope I can help bring other people that little spark of hope to keep going, through telling my story, through writing this book. And as far as a professional career, I don't know where I'm going yet, or what exactly I'm going to do. I'm still kind of figuring out my life right now. But a big part of it's just been focusing on my healing and my family, and doing the best damn job at being a dad and a husband, and a friend that I can be right now, as I kind of transition into new chapters. I don't know what it's going to be. I've got a really good feeling about it, and I'm just kind of, I got all sorts of things I'm thinking about. I'm really excited for it, whatever it ends up being.
I'm so happy to hear all that, honestly. I'm so happy you're writing a book as well. Like, I'm just gonna say it. I want one reserved straight away for me.
You got it, man.
I want to be first in line for this. So make sure you're stocked up, because that's I'm gonna promote the hell out of that as well as soon as it comes out. So I hope it doesn't take years. I hope it comes out tomorrow, man. I really do. And honestly, just credit to you for everything. It's just unbelievable what you've done and what you're doing. And I can't wait to see what happens in your life now. I'm going to be an avid follower. I can't wait to see the stuff that you do. And honestly, I think you're going to succeed at whatever it is, because you've got yourself through all of that. I mean, the rest of life, I mean, it can't seem like that much of a challenge after being through what you've been through and stuff. But look, you've clawed your way back out of there, and I am so happy for you. I can't wait to get this podcast out. I can't wait for people to start hearing it, and I can't wait to dig into that book. But Kegan, hey, look, man, this was that is our 4 questions done for today. And although I'm sad that this one's ending because it's been incredible, but it's time for what I like to call the shameless plug. So, Kegan, feel free to take a minute and promote anything that you're working on, you want people to take a look at, or just something that you really believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of mentioned a few of these organizations that have really helped me, and for the veteran first responder crowd out there, a lot of this can apply to you. But there's a massive variety of nonprofit organizations out there that are picking up all the slack in our healthcare. And the first one I found was called Operation Surf, run by Bank Rosa out of California. Those guys took me out for a little soul recharge, surfing on the California coast. There's Wake for Warriors. Those guys will take you out wake surfing. Those guys helped me again get a little soul recharge as I kind of was in some dark spots in my life. And then Vet Solutions, just reaching out to those guys and them giving me some options. Huge thanks to those guys, and Marcus and Amber Capone, and what they're doing to push forward everything with psychedelic therapies and research, and get this mainstream and legal and available. That is huge. The guys at Warrior Angel Foundation, Andrew and Adam Marr, Andy McIndoe, and all those guys who've taken me in and invited me into this community. Thank you guys. And from there, I met Kelsey Sharon. Thank you to her. She's really helped get me out doing podcasts and put me in contact with all these other organizations. Jesse Gould and Heroic Hearts Project. Those guys are incredible for getting people some psychedelic therapy. Defenders of Freedom, Donna Cranston, and the Resiliency Brain Clinic down in Dallas, Texas. All those guys are incredible. No Fallen Heroes, Matthew Wiz Buckley, and what he's doing to help guys get better. I mean, I'm trying to think of all the people that have been helping me that could help people that are listening right now. Those are the ones off the top of my head at this moment. You can check out my Instagram page at Kegan Smurf Gill. I have a lot of this information up on there, and please feel free to send me a message if you have questions. And if you're just going through a hard time and you want somebody to talk to about what your options might be, I'm always happy to talk and answer genuine questions from genuine human beings. And thank you to my family and my wife and my mom and dad and my kids and all my friends my squadron mates in the fighter community who've, helped get me back in the jet and have given me hope throughout this whole thing. And thank you, Louis, for, doing what you're doing, man. It's awesome to see what you're doing, especially as such a young dude and just crushing it. So thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Kegan. Honestly, you are, I can't describe it any other way. You're just an incredible human being. And
Thanks,
I'm absolutely honored to have had you on this podcast. I feel like it's an absolute miracle that you're still here, and the stuff that you're doing, it's fantastic. And even just that, people, when I ask that question, they'll promote their website, they'll promote all their stuff. But even just now, you're spreading the message, you're giving the love to the people who've helped you and stuff, and that's just such a great thing. So nice to hear. And yeah, I've spoken to Marcus, I've spoken to a couple of the other guys as well, Mark Keller, Slider, and I'm trying to get Wiz Buckley on as well. He's a
Cool.
busy guy, but I'm hoping it's going to happen soon. But
Yeah.
hand on my heart, I can promise that I'm going to do everything I can to get the message out there, and to make sure that people hear not just your story, but the story of all these other veterans with incredible stories too, and make sure that the foundations get seen, and hopefully we can all start to make a positive move to the future. But for now, Kegan, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure and a true honor to have you on.
Thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Hey, we have to do this again in the future. I'm going to want a part two update. I'm just saying it.
All right. Looking
Awesome.
forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. This has been episode 40. Wow, what a great episode for number 40. And if you'd like to listen into our past episodes, go and have a look at our channel. And if you'd like to listen in for our future ones, make sure to hit that subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now.